Ismat Chughtai. In the name of those married women. Part 1. Whose decked up bodies atrophed in loveless, deceitful beds. Faiz Ahmed Faiz. It was about 4 or 4:30 in the afternoon when the doorbell rang loudly. The servant opened the door and drew back in fear. "Who's there?" "Police!" Whenever a theft took place in the Muhalla, all the servants were interrogated. "Police?" Shahid got up in a fluster. "Yes, sir." The servant was shaking with fear. "I haven't done anything, Sahab, I swear it by God." "What's the matter?" Shahid went up to the door and asked. "Summons." "Summons? But, well, where is it?" "Sorry, I can't give it to you." "Summons for what? For whom?" "For Ismat Chughtai. Please call her." The servant heaved a sigh of relief. "But tell me, please call her. The summons is for Lahore." I had prepared milk for my 2-month-old daughter, Seema, and was waiting for it to cool. "Summons from Lahore?" I asked as I held the feeding bottle in cold water. "Yes, from Lahore," Shahid said. Shahid had lost his cool by then. Holding the bottle in my hand, I came out barefoot. "What is the summons about?" "Read it," said the police inspector dourly. As I read the heading, Ismat Chughtai versus the Crown, I broke into laughter. "Good God! What complaint does the exalted king have against me that he has filed the suit?" "It's no joke," the inspector said severely. "Read it first and sign it." I read throughout the summons, but could barely make sense of it. My story, Lihav, had been accused of obscenity. The government had brought a suit against me, and I had to appear before the Lahore High Court in January. Otherwise, the government would penalize me severely. "Well, I won't take the summons." "You have to." "Why?" I began to argue as usual. "What's up?" This was Moshin Abdullah, sprinting up the stairs. He was returning from some unknown destination, and his whole body was covered with dust. "Just see, these people want to inflict this summons on me. Why should I take it?" Moshin passed his law exams and obtained a first class. "Which story is this?" he asked after reading the summons. "It is an ill-fated story in which has become a source of torment for me." "You'll have to take the summons." "Why?" "Don't be stubborn," Shahid flared up. "I won't take it. If you don't, you'll be arrested," Moshin growled. "Let them arrest me. I won't take the summons." "You'll be put in prison." "In prison? Good. I've a great desire to see a prison house. I've urged Yusuf umpteen times to take me to a prison, but he just smiles. "Inspector Sahab, please take me to jail." "Have you brought handcuffs?" I asked sweetly. The inspector was flustered. Barely restraining his anger, he said, "Don't joke. Just sign it." Shahid and Moshin railed me. I chattered on merely. When my father was a judge in Sambar, the court used to be convened in the Mardana, that part of the house meant for menfolk. Through the window we would watch thieves and robbers being brought in handcuffs and chains. Once a band of fearsome robbers was brought in. They had a beautiful woman with them, a stately figure in coat and breeches. She had the eyes of an eagle. Her waist was supple as a leopard's, and she was a luxuriant crop of long black hair on her head. I had been greatly impressed by her. Shahid and Moshin made me thoroughly confused. I wanted the inspector to hold the feeding bottle so that I could sign, but he retreated as though I handed him a gun. Moshin quickly snatched away the bottle from me, and I signed. "Come down to the police station to sign the surety document. The surety is for 500 rupees. "I don't have 500 rupees with me now. Someone else must stand surety for you. I don't want to implicate anyone. If I don't present myself in court, the money will be lost. I try to show off my knowledge of the law. Please arrest me." The inspector didn't get angry this time. He smiled and looked at Shahid, who was sitting on the sofa, holding his head in his hands. Then he said gently, "Please come along. It'll just take a couple of minutes." "But the surety?" I asked, mollified. I was ashamed of my stupid behavior. "I'll stand surety for you," said Moshin. "But my child is hungry. Her ayah is young and inexperienced." "Feed the child," said the inspector. "Then please come in." Moshin invited the policeman inside. The inspector turned out to be one of Sashid's fans and flattered him so much that he forgot his irritation and began to talk pleasantly. Moshin, Shahid, and I went to the Mahim police station. Having completed the formalities, I asked, "Where are the prisoners?" "Would you like to see them?" "Of course." There were 10 or 12 men lying in a huddle behind the railings. "These are the accused, not the prisoners," said the inspector. "What crime have they committed?" "Brawls, violence, pickpocketing, drunken fights." "What will the punishment for them be?" "They'll be fined or imprisoned for a few days." I was disappointed that I got to see only the petty thieves. A couple of murderers or highwaymen would have made the visit more exciting. Where would you have put me up?" "We do not have arrangements to house women prisoners here. They are taken either to Grant Road or Matunga." After returning from the police station, Shahid and Moshin chided me severely. In fact, Shahid fought with me the whole night and even threatened divorce. I silenced Moshin by saying that if he made too much fuss, I would disappear and he would lose his 500 rupees. Shahid could not bear the disgrace and humiliation of a public suit. His parents and elder brother would be terribly upset if they heard of it. When the newspapers published the news, Shahid received a touching letter from my father-in-law which ran as, "Try to reason with Dulan. Tell her to chant the names of Allah and the Prophet. A lawsuit is bad enough. That too on charges of obscenity. We are very worried. May God help you." Manto phoned us to say that a suit had been filed against him too. He had to appear in the same court on the same day. He and Safiya landed at our place. Manto was looking very pleased with himself, as though he had been awarded the Victoria Cross. Though I put up a courageous front, I felt quite embarrassed. I was nervous too, but Manto encouraged me so that I forgot all my qualms. "Come on, it's only the great story you've ever written. Shahid, be a man and come to Lahore with us. The winter in Lahore is very severe. Aha, roasted fish with whiskey, fire in the fireplace like the burning flame in a lover's heart, blood, red maltas like a lover's kiss." "Be quiet, Manto Sahab," Safiya reprimanded him. The filthy letters began to arrive. They were filled with such inventive and convoluted obscenities that had they been uttered before a corpse, it would have got up and run for cover. Not only me, but my whole family, including Shahid and my 2-month-old child, were dragged into the muck. I am scared of mud, muck, and lizards. Many people pretend to be courageous, but are scared of dead mice. I began to fear my mail as though the envelopes contained snakes, scorpions, and dragons. I would read the first few words and then burn the letters. Whenever they fell into Shahid's hands, he would repeat his threats of divorce. Besides the letters, there were the articles published in newspapers and debates in literary and cultural gatherings. Only a strong-hearted person like myself could put up with them. I never retaliated, nor did I refuse to admit my mistake. I was aware of my fault. Manto was the only person who would get furious at my cowardice. I was against my own self, and he supported me. None of my friends or Shahids attached much importance to it. I am not quite sure, but probably Abbas had got the English translation of Lihaf published somewhere. The progressives neither appreciated nor found fault with me. This suited me fine. I was staying with my brother when I wrote Lihaf. I had completed the story at night. In the morning, I read it out to my sister-in-law. She didn't think it was vulgar, though she recognized the characters portrayed in it. Then I read it to my aunt's daughter, who was 14 years old. She didn't understand what the story was about. I sent it to Adab-e-Latif, where it was published immediately. Shahid Ahmed Dehlavi was getting a collection of my short stories published and included it in the volume. The story was published in 1942 when Shahid and I were going around and were thinking of marriage. Shahid didn't have the story and we had a fight. Didn't like the story and we had a fight. But the controversies surrounding Lihaf had not reached Bombay yet. Among journals I subscribed only to Saki and Adab el Latif. Shahid was not too angry and we got married. In December 1944, we received summons to appear before the court in January. Everybody said that we would just be fined, not imprisoned. So we were quite excited and began to get warm clothes stitched for our way to Lahore. Seema was a small baby. She was weak and whimpery. We showed her to a child specialist who declared that she was in good health. Nevertheless, it was not wise to expose her to the severe cold in Lahore. So I left her with Sultan Jafri's mother in Aglira and set out for Lahore. From Delhi, I was joined by Shahid Ahmed Delavi and the calligrapher who had copied the manuscript. The Crown had made him one of the accused as well. The suit was brought not against Adab el Latif but against the book published by Shahid Ahmed Delavi. Sultana had come to the station to pick us up. She worked in the Lahore radio station and was staying at Lukman Sahab's place. It was a gorgeous mansion. Lukman Sahab's wife, along with her children, had gone to visit her parents. Thus, the entire place was at our disposal. Mantu had also reached Lahore, and soon we were flooded with invitations. Most of the callers were Manto's friends, but many also wanted to have a look at a strange creature like me. One day we appeared before the court. The judge only asked my name and wanted to know if I had written the story. I admitted to the crime. That was all. We were greatly disappointed. Our lawyer kept on talking all the time. We couldn't make much of it as we were whispering among ourselves. Then the date of the next hearing was announced, and we were free to enjoy ourselves. Manto, Shahid, and I roamed around in a tonga, shopping. We bought Kashmiri, shawls, and shoes. When we were buying shoes, the sight of Manto's delicate feet filled me with envy. I almost broke into tears looking at my rough and graceless feet. I hate my feet, said Manto. Why? They're so grateful. They are absolutely womanly. So, I suppose you've an abiding interest in women. You always argue from the wrong angle. I love women as a man. That does not mean that I want to be a woman myself. Come on, forget this man-woman controversy. Let's talk about human beings. But do you know, people with delicate feet are very sensitive and intelligent? My brother Azim Bek Chughtai, too, had very delicate feet, and I was reminded of how his feet had swollen up before he died and become a detestable sigh. And Lahore decked me like a newly wedded bride with apples and flowers, was transformed into a sandy graveyard in Jodhpur, where my brother-in-law sleeping in his grave under tons of earth. Thorny bushes were planted on his grave, and the hyenas would not dig up out the corpse. Those thorns began to stab, and I left the fine woolen shawl on the counter. We wandered about the streets of Lahore, our pockets stuffed with pistachios. We popped them into our mouth one after another, and we walked along, engrossed in conversation. Standing on a lane, we gorged ourselves on fish fries. My appetite was wonderful. In the salubrious climate of Lahore, whatever one ate was digested easily. We entered a hotel. My mouth began to water at the sight of the hot dogs and hamburgers. Hamburgers contain ham, that is, pig's meat. We can have a hot dog, Sahid said, and, like good Muslims, we abstained from eating hamburger. We stuffed ourselves with hot dogs, washing them down with the juice of Kandari pomegranate. However, we soon realized how crafty the white race is. If hamburgers contain pig meat, hot dogs contain pig sausage. When we heard this, Shahid felt like vomiting, even though it had been 2 days since we had been eating the hot dogs. It was only when Maulvi Sahab expressed the view that if one ate unwittingly, one could be forgiven, that Shahid felt somewhat relieved of his emetic fits. In the evening, when Shahid and Manto got themselves drunk, the hamburger hot dog controversy received again and raged on it for some time. Eventually, it was decided that one should abstain from both because it was impossible to prove conclusively which was halal and which was haram. Under the circumstances, they settled for chicken tikka. We made the rounds of Ankara and Shalimar and saw Nur Jahan's mausoleum. Then followed upteen rounds of invitations, mushahiras, and huti. And suddenly, my heart sent up a thanksgiving prayer to the Crown of England for providing us with this unique opportunity of enjoying ourselves in Lahore. I began to look forward eagerly to the second hearing. I did not even care if the verdict was that I would be hanged. If it occurred in Lahore, I would certainly achieve the status of a martyr. The people of Lahore would give me a fitting funeral. Ismat Chughtai, in the name of those married women. Part 2. The second hearing was scheduled for November 1946. The weather was very pleasant. Shahid was preoccupied with his film. Seema was now a healthy child and her ayah too was quite competent, so I left her in Bombay and flew to Delhi. Shahid Ahmed Delavi and the calligrapher joined me, and from there we went by train. I used to feel sorry for the calligrapher. He was dragged in for no fault of his own. He was a harmless and quiet sort of fellow, with a permanent frown on his face. I used to feel guilty at the very sight of him. Copying the manuscript of my book had brought him all this trouble for him. I asked him, "What do you think? Shall we win the case?" "I can't say anything. I haven't read the story." "But you copied it." "I see each word separately and do not ponder on it over its meanings." "Strange. And don't you read them after they're printed?" "I do, to see if there are any mistakes." "Each word separately?" "Yes." He looked down in embarrassment. A few moments later, he said, "I hope you don't mind if I say something." "Not at all." "Your writing contained many orthographic mistakes." "I know. I always confuse sin, schwad, and the, swai, zwad, zay, zal. The same happens with the aspirates." "Didn't you practice spelling on the takti?" "I did, and always got punished for these mistakes. The fact is, just as I concentrate on words, but not on their meanings, you get so impatient to put across your point of view that you can't pay attention to the letters. I pray to God for the long life and prosperity of all my calligraphers. They would rectify my mistakes, and I'd be spared of the embarrassment. I went to say that Mr. Aslam's house, along with Shahid Sahab. Hardly had we exchanged greetings that he blew his top over the alleged obscenity of my writings. I retaliated like a woman possessed. Shahid Sahab tried to restrain me, but in vain. "You've used such vulgar words in your Gunanrad Antail. You've even described the details of the sexth act. Just to titillate," I said. "My case is different. I'm a man." "Am I to blame for that?" "What do you mean?" His face was flushed with anger. "What I mean is, God has made you a man. I had no hand in it, and He has made me a woman. You had no hand in it. You have the freedom to write whatever you want. You don't need my permission. Similarly, I don't feel any need to seek your permission for writing the way I want to. You're an educated girl from a decent Muslim family. You're also educated and from a decent Muslim family. Do you want to compete with men?" "Certainly not. I always endeavored to obtain higher marks than the boys in the class and often succeeded in that. I knew that I was being pig-headed as usual." Aslam Sahad's voice was red hot with anger. I was afraid he would hit me or his jugular vein would burst. Shahid Sahab was aghast, almost in tears. I assumed a softer tone and said humbly, "Aslam Sahab, actually no one had told me that it was a sin to write on the topic with which Lihaf is concerned, nor had I read it in any book that such a disease, such aberrations should not be written about. Perhaps my mind is not an artist's brush like Abdurrad Hamzan Chughtai, but an ordinary camera that records reality as it is. The pen becomes helpless in my hand because my mind overwhelms it. Nothing can interfere with this traffic between the mind and the pen. Wasn't any religious education imparted to you? Aslan Sahab, I've read Beshir Sevar. Such explicit things are written there, I said innocently. Aslam Sahab looked upset. I continued. When I read it in my childhood, I was shocked. Those things seemed vulgar to me. But when I read it again after my BA, I realized that they were not vulgar. They were important facts of life, about which every sensible person should be aware. Well, people can brand the books prescribed in the courses of psychology and medicine vulgar if they so want. The storm subsided, and we began to talk in normal tones. Aslam Sahab had cooled down a bit, and breakfast was served. There were 4 of us, but the elaborate arrangements would have been enough for 15 people. There were 4 kinds of eggs: plain, fried, scrambled, boiled, shami kebab, keema, paranta, puri, toast with white and yellow butter, yogurt, milk, honey, dry fruits, egg halva, carrot halva, sohan halva. By God, do you want to kill us? I had teased him enough. To make up for it, now I began to praise his writings. I had read Nargis and Gunnar Ratain and began to praise them in superlative terms. Eventually he came round to the view that a deliberate, stark style of narration made for both clarity and instruction. Then he began to enumerate the merits of all the books he had written. Now he was in a genial mood. Tender an apology to the judge, Aslan Sahab advised gently. Why? Our lawyer says we will win the case. Nonsense. If you and Manto tender your apologies, the case can be wound up in 5 minutes. Many respectable people here have put pressure on the government to bring the suit against us. Nonsense, Aslan Sahab said, but could not look me in the eye. Do you mean the King of England or the people in the government have actually read the stories and thought about filing a suit? Aslan Sahab, some writers, critics and people in high positions have drawn the attention of the government to the books as being detrimental to morality and urged it to ban them, said Shahid Sahab in a subdued tone. If morally detrimental writings are not to be banned, should we offer homage to them? Aslan Sahab growled and Shahid Sahab cowered in embarrassment. Then we deserve punishment, I said. Being pig-headed again. No, Aslan Sahab, I really meant it. If I've committed a crime and innocent people have been led astray, why should I escape punishment merely by tendering an apology? If I've committed a crime and if it is proved, then only punishment can peace to my conscience. I said sincerely without any trace of sarcasm. Don't be obstinate. Tender the apology. What will the punishment be after all? I'll be fined? It will bring you disgrace. I've suffered enough disgrace. It can't be worse. This lawsuit is nothing compared to that. Then I asked, how much will they fine me? 200 or 300, I suppose, said Shahid Sahab. That's all? Maybe 500, threatened Aslan Sahab. That's all? Have you come into piles of money? Aslan Sahab was incensed. With your blessings. If I don't have money, won't you pay up 500 rupees to save me from going to jail? You are counted among the aristocrats of Lahore. You've a glib tongue. My mother had the same complaint. She used to say a glib tongue invites misfortune. Everyone laughed and the tension in the atmosphere melted. However, a few moments later, he began to repeat his plea for an apology. I felt like smashing his head and mine as well. Then he changed the topic all of a sudden and asked me, why did you write Dozaki? There was an explosion in my head. What kind of a sister are you to call your own brother hellbound? He might be hellbound or heavenbound. What's that to you? He's my friend. He was my brother. Curse on a sister like you. I haven't told anyone till today what anguish I had to go through while writing Dozaki. What fires of hell I had to traverse, and how much of me was burnt in that fire. It was late in the night. The clock was struck 2 when I had finished writing the sketch. What a terrible night it was! The sea had risen up to the steps of our house as the boundary wall had not been yet erected. A storm was raging in my breast. Whatever I had written seemed to roll up in me like a cinema reel. As I put out the lamp, I felt suffocated. Afraid, I lit the lamp again. I was afraid of the dark. I was reminded vividly of the grave in which the body of my brother was lowered. After seeing his grave, I could not sleep alone in my room for months. My aunt's daughter, much younger than I, would sleep beside me and keep me company. I felt suffocated in Jodhpur and ran away to Bombay. Out of 10 pillars, one had caved in. Who could have fathomed the gulf it had created? Without answering Aslan Sahab, I went to my room quietly and started packing my suitcase. I phoned Sultana and asked her to come immediately and take me away from there. If Aslam Sahab tries to stop me, just blow him up, I told her. I'll reach there immediately after the office gets over at 5. Oh no, by then there will be a murder or two. Come right away. Sultana was there in 5 minutes. Aslan Sahab refused to let me go, but Sultana, as instructed, would not give in. As the tug of war between them went on, I split my sides with laughter. Eventually, I left with Sultana. Ismat Chughtai. In the name of those married women. Part 3. We appeared before the court on the day of the hearing. The witnesses who had to prove that Manto's story, Boo, and my story, Lihaf, were obscene, were all present. My lawyer instructed me not to open my mouth till the interrogation began. We would answer the queries as he thought fit. Boo was taken up first. Is this story obscene? Manto's lawyer asked. Yes, answered the witness. Can you put your finger on a word which is obscene? Witness. The word chest. Lawyer. My lord, the word chest is not obscene. Witness. No, but here the writer means a woman's breast. Manto was on his feet instantly and blurted out, a woman's chest must be called a woman's breast and not ground nuts. If the court reverberated with loud guffaws. Manto too began to laugh. If the accused shows his frivolity a second time, he will be turned out or punished for severe contempt of court. Manto's lawyer whispered into his ear, and he understood the situation. The debate went on. The witnesses could find no other word except chest, and it could not be proved obscene. If the word chest is obscene, why not knee or elbow? I asked Manto. Nonsense, Manto growled. The arguments continued. We went out and sat on some of benches. Ahmed Nadim Kazmi had brought a basket of maltas. He also taught us a fine way of eating them. Squeeze the malta to make it soft like one does to a mango. Then pierce a hole in it and go on sucking the juicy berry. Sitting there, we sucked up the whole basket. The maltas only whetted our appetite, and we barged into a hotel during the lunch break. I had been very unwell when Seema was born and had lost a lot of weight, so there was no restriction on calories. However, the chicken served to us was as tough as an eagle. We garnished it with large black peppers and ate it with kulchas. And in place of water, there was the juice of the Kandri's pomegranate. Involuntarily, a prayer came out from my heart for the people who had filed the lawsuit. In the evening, Lukman had invited a few writers and poets over. There, for the first time in my life, I met Hijab Imtiaz Ali. She was in heavy makeup, a thick line of kajol in her eyes. She looked somewhat angry, somewhat melancholic. Whenever anyone asked her of a question, she would gaze into space. A fraud, whispered Manto into my ears, dilating his large eyes. No, she is lost in the world of dreams created by her pen and prefers to stay in that multicolored shell. Hijab Imtiaz Ali continued to gaze into the far beyond while I tracked down Imtiaz Ali and started talking him and started talking to him. What a world of difference there was in the temperaments of husband and wife. Imtiaz Sahab was garrulous, open-hearted, and full of laughter. The assembly was at its glorious best. It seemed to me that I had known him for years. His talk was even more lively than his writing. Recently, when I went to Pakistan, I met hijabbed Imtiaz Ali again. She wore light makeup and looked younger and lively. She was absolutely informal and friendly. It was as though she had been born again. I had great desire to see Arganun, allusions to which were so frequent in her stories. When I went to Hijab's house, I asked her, "Do you really have an Arjanun?" "Yes. Do you want to see it?" "Of course. This world in your stories has an intoxicating effect on me." I also told her that at one time I had written some prose in verse in imitation of hers, which I had burnt later. At the sight of the Arganun, all my zest and romance pettered out. It was the same sort of baby piano that the de Mello played in films and songs. It was used for background music, to produce tunes to suggest the heroine's mental turmoil when she was angry. The word organ is so dull, the addition of gain made it sound like the lil tuning of Asavari. Ismat Chughtai. In the name of those married women. Part 4. The court was crowded the next day. Several people had advised us to tender an apology. They were ready to pay the fine on our behalf. The excitement surrounding the lawsuit was waning. The witnesses who had wanted to prove Lihaf obscene were thrown into confusion by my lawyer. They were not able to put their finger on any word in the story that would prove their point. After a good deal of reflection, one of them said, "This phrase, collecting lovers, is obscene." "Which word is obscene? Collect or lover?" the lawyer asked. "Lover," replied the witness a little hesitantly. "My lord, the word lover has been used by great poets most liberally. It is also used in naats, that is, poems written in praise of the Prophet. God-fearing people have accorded it a very high status." "But it is objectionable for girls to collect lovers," said the witness. "Why?" Because it is objectionable for good girls to do so." "And if the girls are not good, then it is not objectionable?" "No. My client must have referred to the girls who were not good." "Yes, madam. Do you mean here that bad girls collect lovers?" "Yes." "Well, this may not be obscene. But it is reprehensible for an educated lady from a decent family to write about such things," the witness thundered. "Censurable it as much as you want, but it does not come within the purview of law." The issue lost much of its steam. "If you agree to apologize, we'll pay up the entire expense incurred by you." Someone I didn't know whispered into my ear. "Should we apologize, Manto Sahab? We can buy a lot of goodies with the money we'll get," I suggested to Manto. "Nonsense," growled Manto, and his peacock eyes bulged out again. "I'm sorry, this madcap Manto doesn't agree." "But why don't you—" "No. You don't know what a quarrelsome fellow he is. He'll make my life miserable in Bombay. I'd rather undergo the punishment than risk his wrath." The judge called me into the anteroom attached to the court and said quite informally, "I've read most of your stories. They are not obscene. Neither is Lihaf. But Manto's writings are often littered with filth." "The world is also littered with filth," I said in a feeble voice. "It is necessary to rake it up, then?" "If it is raked up, it becomes visible and people feel the need to clean it up." The judge laughed. I was not terribly worried when the suit was filed. Neither did I feel elated now that I had won it. Rather, I felt sad at the thought that it might be a long while before I got a chance to visit Lahore again. Lahore. How beautiful the word sounds. Lahori salt crystals are like gems, white and pink. I felt like getting them chiseled and fixed in my chandan har and then draping the garland around the swan-like neck for some fair tribal woman. Nami Nami Tariyan Dilao. Surinder Kaur's lilting voice was enchanting. The accompanying voice of Sodi, her husband, sounded like the rustle of fine silk. The city of Lahore reminded me of the music of Surinder and Sodi. One felt a tumult in one's heart, and a great sense of contentment. The memory of the unknown, ethereal lover invaded one's being like the force of a deep anguish. The air of Lahore is shot through with a special light. The bells twinkle in silence and one can almost feel the delicate ambience created in the writings of Hijab Imtiaz Ali. One is immediately taken back to the time in one's life when one got so lost in the twilight world of her stories. But then I read Charles Dickens, David Copperfield, Oliver Twist, Tono Bungay, and Gorky's Mother, all of which brought me back from the world of romance to the world of reality. Chekhov, Emile Zola, Gogol, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Maupassant. All the castles of my heart came crashing down, and I was thrown back, as it were, into the bungalow of straw near Lal Digi in Algira, where we lived. This bungalow was made of kucha bricks, and if one hit a nail in the wall, the clay came down in a deluge of sand. The floor was littered with the droppings of pigeons, who roosted in the roofs above. Bats hung from beams. The bungalow had an earthen floor, and whenever there was a dust storm, a whirlwind would rage inside the house. There was neither electricity nor tap water. The bishti would carry water to the house in his camel skin bag. There were string cots on which durries and dirty kadar sheets were spread. The pillows were sticky with oil. Amma had given up wearing her baggy farshi pyjamas that needed 12 yards of clothing and had started wearing a dhoti. There was a time when we had a horde of servants in the house. Amma would provide shelter to all the needy who came begging for alms. After Abba Mian retired, she had to exercise economy. Only Ali Bakish and his wife Shikan Bua, who did the cooking, remained. In addition to them, we had to retain the coachman and his wife, as well as because we still owned 2 horses and a buffalo. Probably I was jealous of the poetic aura created by Hijab Imtiaz Ali. My family atmosphere was not at all conducive to romance. I had written my first story, Bacham, after a good deal of reflection. The only journal our family subscribed to was Tizib Ab Nizwan, to which I sent the story. It came back along with a letter of reprimand from the editor, Mumtaz Ali Sahab, the father of Imtiaz Ali Taj. In the story I had compared my childhood with that of Hijab Imtiaz Ali. The point of his objection was, I had described in the story how I was beaten by the Mauli Sahab for my inability to pronounce the verses from the Quran correctly. I could never say Ain. If I tried hard, it would be Qaf. He wrote that by making fun of the Quran, I was being blasphemous. Later, when my writing began to appear in journals, this story was published in Saki, and people liked it a lot. I also got fed up with Azim Bai's stories and their stilted romantic ambience. They were false, and did not contain any inkling of the anguish of his own life. He wrote about the antics of his brothers as though they were his own. I was a spoiled brat and used to get bashed up often for telling the truth. But when the disputes were taken to Abba Mian, he would decide in my favor. My elder sister, who was widowed at 19, was extremely bitter about life. She was greatly impressed with the high society of Aligarh, particularly the Khwaja family. I couldn't get along with the begums of that family for even a moment. I was a madcap, outspoken and ill-mannered. Purda had already been imposed on me, but my tongue was an unsheathed sword. No one could restrain it. The world around me seemed like a delusion. The apparently shy and respectable girls of the families I knew allowed themselves to be grabbed and kissed in bathrooms and in dark corners by young male relatives. Such girls were considered modest. What boy would take interest in a plain Jane like me? I had studied so much that whenever there was a debate, I would beat up to a pulp all the young men who were scared of the sight of books. They considered themselves superior to women merely because they were men. Then I read Angare on the sly. Rashid Appa was the only person who instilled a sense of confidence in me. I accepted her as a mentor. In the hypocritical, vicious atmosphere of Aligara, she was a much maligned lady. She appreciated my outspokenness, and I quickly read up all the books recommended by her. And I started writing. My play Fasadi was published in Saki. After that, I wrote several stories. None of them was ever rejected. Suddenly, some people began to object to them, but the demand from journals went on increasing. I didn't care much for the objections. But when I wrote Lihav, there was a veritable explosion. I was torn to shreds in the literary arena. Some people also wielded their pens in my support. Since then, I have been branded an obscene writer. No one bothered about what I had written before or after Lihav, but I was put down as a purveyor of sex. It is only in the last couple of years that the younger generation has recognized that I am a realist and not an obscene writer. Ismat Chughtai, In the Name of Those Married Women, Part 5. I am fortunate that I have been appreciated in my lifetime. Manto was driven mad to the extent that he became a wreck. The progressives did not come to his rescue. In my case, they didn't write me off, nor did they offer me great accolades. Manto became a pauper in Pakistan. My circumstances were quite comfortable. The income from my film career was substantial, and I didn't care much for a literary death or life. I continued to remain a follower of the progressives and endeavored to bring about the revolution. I am still labeled as the writer of Lihav. The story brought me so much notoriety that I was sick of life. It had become the proverbial stick to beat me with, and whenever I wrote afterwards got crushed under its weight. Then I wrote Tehri Lakir and sent it to Shahid Ahmed Delavi. He gave it to Mohammad Hassan Askari for his opinion. After reading it, Askari advised me to make my heroine a lesbian like the protagonist in Lihav. I was furious. I got the novel back from Delavi, even though the calligrapher had started working on it, and handed it over to Nazir Ahmad in Lahore. Lahore was then part of India. Lihav had made my life miserable. Shahid and I had so many fights over the story that life had become a battlefield. I went to Aligarh after many years. The thought of the Begum who was the subject of my story made my hair stand on end. She had already been told what Lihav was based on her life. We stood face to face during a dinner. I felt the ground under my feet receding. She looked at me with big eyes that conveyed excitement and joy. Then she cruised through the crowd, leaped at me, and took her in her arms. Drawing me to one side, she said, "Do you know I have a pearl of a son by God's grace?" I felt like throwing myself into someone's arms and crying my heart out. I couldn't restrain my tears, though. In fact, I was laughing loudly. She invited me to a fabulous dinner. I felt fully rewarded when I saw her flower-like boy. I felt he was mine as well, a part of my mind, a living product of my brain, an offspring of my pen. And I realized that, at that moment, that flowers can be made to bloom in rocks. The only condition is that one has to water the plant with one heart's blood. Just one more thing. I had asked the gentleman, "Do you think Lihav is morally subversive?" "Undoubtedly." "Why do you think so?" "When one reads the story, one feels sexually aroused." "I see. And you want to snuggle into a Lihav?" "Oh no, actually, the Begum is very sexy. She is ravagingly beautiful, endowed with substance and sweetness. A well-proportioned body, warm lips, intoxicating eyes. She's a burning flame, a cup of overflowing with wine." "So?" "The devil tempts one." "What does she say?" to with her. The devil is wise. My objective was just that. How I wanted that some brave fellow should release her from Rabu's clutches, encircle her within his strong arms, and slake her life's thirst. It's a virtuous act to provide water to a thirsty creature. May I have her address? You've been born rather late in the day. By God's grace, she's now a grandmother. Many years ago, a prince released her from the magic castle of the Black Giant and transported her to the spring garden of life. From a nearby apartment, the voice of Naira Noor was floating across. She was singing Faiz's verse. In the name of those married women, whose decked up bodies, atrophied on loveless, deceitful beds. And I wondered, who is the ideal Indian woman? Sita, the embodiment of purity, whose lotus-like feet cooled down the flames on which she had to walk? Mirabai, who had put her arms around God himself? Savitri, who had snatched back her husband's life from the angel of death? And Razia Sultana, who spurned great emperors to join her destiny with that of a Moorish slave. Is she getting suffocated today under the lihaf? Or is she playing holy with her own blood in Faraz's road? Translated by M. Azabuddin.